Happy Friday, everybody. Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. A lot to talk about regarding the reaction to Jovic's contract extension, Tyler Herro's timeline, and his take on the whole situation and more. But before we get into that, don't forget to drop a like on this video. And of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to Miami Heat right here, Monday through Friday. Kicking things off with reaction regarding Nikola Jovic's 4-year, $62.4 million contract extension. A lot of people are pretty excited about this deal. Fred Katz and Zach Lowe saying, yes, this was a great extension, especially at the range, what the money he'd be getting for over those 4 years, which kind of averages out to about $15 million per year. And Keith Smith also agreeing with this, saying that either more than 15 million was a little bit too much for Jovic, but then less than 15 million was also a little bit too little. So good deal on both parts in terms of Miami and Jovic in terms of negotiating that contract. Those were their kind of takes on it. But then Sam Vecenie also saying that this number was a little bit higher than he initially expected, just given the fact that he hasn't really played a full year in the NBA just yet. He thought somewhere in the ballpark of 3 years for $42 million was a little bit more of a realistic extension for him. That would kind of equate out to 4 years for $55 million, which was about $7 million less than what Jovic ended up getting out of this contract extension. Would be better, but given the type of player that is being signed, his size, the consistency, and in terms of just how he's developed over the past couple of seasons, it really wasn't a bet. He ultimately said because of those factors, the player, the size, the passing and shooting ability, it wasn't necessarily a bad deal. And I don't think these takes are the worst takes in the world. I know I was saying on the last episode that quite honestly, with the question marks surrounding what the deal was going to be in terms of Tyler Herro's extension, that could maybe put a damper on things in terms of the number he wanted versus the number Miami wanted to give him. But I don't necessarily disagree with these takes, just because $15 million per year is definitely kind of warranted given Miami's situation right now. They desperately need a consistent forward in their front court. And I think considering that's the money they're kind of shelling out, I kind of agree with Vecenie a little bit more in the sense that 3 years for $42 million would have been a little bit better, just because it would have really shelled out to $7 million less dollars in the grand scheme of things. But I definitely I don't disagree with these guys in the fact that a deal needed to be made, and I think it is a good thing that Miami was able to kind of at least put an extension for Jovic up on the board already, at least for the foreseeable future. Drop in the comments what you guys think, if this was a good move, if the price tag was right, or Miami should have maybe settled for a deal kind of like Vecenie was initially predicting. But ultimately, it doesn't really seem like this is going to be the worst idea in the world. Now, also during this extension, Jovic will never make more than 9% of the NBA salary cap, which is also pretty good in the grand scheme of things. So quite honestly, I don't, now kind of looking at it, I don't necessarily think this was Miami getting robbed in any way, shape, or form for striking up this kind of extension for Jovic. But it would have been nice to see them sign him for at least the 3 years for a little bit less money, just because they're in a position right now where they kind of am trying to save money. But now moving over to some more news with Miami regarding Tyler Herro. He had some interesting things to say about his timeline regarding coming back from his ankle surgery, and he was saying that it's now even sooner than the reports are initially suggesting. He initially told Spoelstra 6 weeks. The timeline we kind of saw at the beginning of this week was 8 to 12 weeks, but now he's going on and saying, quote, "I'm about to make the fastest ankle surgery comeback in history. As of now, I'm going to be back about 5 games into the season." And quite honestly, I love the confidence, but I don't really see this being a very realistic timeline in the grand scheme of things. Again, love the optimism, and I think that he is on a pretty good trajectory in the grand scheme of things, given that he's come out right and said this. But this would pretty much put his return at roughly either October 30th against the Spurs or November 2nd against the Lakers, which is at least 3 to 4 weeks before when reports were initially kind of predicting that he was going to return for Miami. And I just think this is a little bit unrealistic. So it's nice to kind of see him say this, because it's definitely going to get Heat fans' hopes up, especially if Miami can't necessarily get those pieces that they want to develop in some of those games that he's not going to be present for. But I do think that the optimism is definitely showing, and I think it's this quote to me is a little bit too much. I don't want to say it's crazy, but I think it's a little bit too optimistic, at least to say at this point in time. Drop in the comments if you think Tyler's getting really excited for the regular season, and that's maybe why he came out and said that, or for all we know, the recovery of his ankle injury could be going better than we expected, and maybe he could be on track for a November 2nd type of return, hoping that he's able to at least stay healthy, and then it doesn't result in 3 or 4 games later he's sidelined again because his ankle is sore or he's dealing with some other kind of injury or something of that nature in between. But again, love to see the optimism from Harrow here, but I just don't think that's really a super realistic timeline initially, because he said 6 weeks, which does put him closer to that November 2nd return date, but I don't at this point in time I don't really see that coming to fruition. And now another report that I had seen earlier this week regarding at least another trade deal that Miami could potentially conjure up, but I really don't think would benefit them in the grand scheme of things. I guess if they decided to tear it all down, this wouldn't be completely far-fetched to at least mock up, but I don't really think this deal would benefit Miami in any way, shape, or form. The deal would entail sending Bam Adebayo to team up with LaMelo Ball in Charlotte, and the deal, basically, Miami would only be giving up Bam Adebayo, but they'd be getting Miles Bridges, Con Knipple, multiple first-round draft assets, including 2 2027 first-round picks, a 2028 first-round pick, and then pick swaps in 2029 and 2030, all in the first round. And yes, you're getting a ton of first-round draft assets, and you're getting 2 solid players, with Knipple also, really not showing anything, at least. Well, he's a rookie, so he hasn't really played in an NBA game yet and hasn't really shown his worth as an NBA player at this point in time. So the potential could be wavering, at least in a positive direction, but also in a negative direction. But I just think in the grand scheme of things, this is not what maybe Miami should even, this is an idea Miami should not really consider right now. I just think that it was very interesting that if a tear down type of scenario were to happen, that maybe acquiring that many draft assets could potentially benefit Miami in terms of stacking up a lot of draft picks, at least for the foreseeable future. So if they did decide to trade Bam and then deal Wiggins around the trade deadline, which I'm going to get into a potential deal in the next segment involving Wiggins, if they did kind of try to go this route where they were going to tear the whole thing down and get rid of Harrow and Bam and Wiggins, this is definitely one deal that could help them get some assets to maybe potentially conjure up some sort of rebuild for Miami in the foreseeable future, and could definitely make them seem more of like an OKC team just a few seasons ago, where they had stacked up draft picks and now have won an NBA championship and still have a plethora of picks going into the next couple of seasons. Again, I don't really think this would benefit Miami in any way, shape, or form, and I don't think they should go the rebuild route and look at this trade honestly quite seriously, because I really just think it benefits Charlotte in the grand scheme of things. But ultimately, I just think that Charlotte's really the only beneficiary in this, because Bam Adebayo, if you're going to conjure some sort of rebuild, I'd trade Tyler or Wiggins before I'd trade Bam, just because at this point in time, I'd say Bam is the most talented player on the roster, and I don't think Miles Bridges and Con Knipple are at least player assets that are worth trading for a big man such as Bam Adebayo. And now moving over to our last segment today, Jonathan Kuminga has finally struck a deal with the Golden State Warriors after all the turmoil that's kind of went down this past summer. He finally agreed to a deal with Golden State. He's going to be back after signing a 2-year, $48.5 million contract deal. And some of the speculation I've been seeing around this and how it ties to Miami is, now if the experiment with Kuminga still being unhappy with the Warriors, could we potentially see a trade at the deadline involving Kuminga and Wiggins now? And I think if things don't necessarily pan out the way that Miami is hoping with Andrew Wiggins, that idea isn't completely far-fetched. And I wouldn't be completely against it either if we see Wiggins kind of go through a similar scenario like Rozier, where you bring this guy in, he isn't the player that he once was, he kind of falls out of the rotation a little bit and really is kind of just sitting on the bench, taking up salary cap space in the grand scheme of things. So if you're Miami, I don't necessarily think, if things don't work out with Wiggins, that looking for a deal with sending him back to Golden State in a deal for Jonathan Kuminga could be the worst idea in the world. But again, this is a very early take, and I think it's way too early to tell if this would actually be a good trade or not. Because if Kuminga blows up for Golden State, there's no way they would want to make that trade, especially if Wiggins isn't necessarily playing at a high ceiling that Miami is hoping that he's going to play for. But we'll just kind of have to wait and see. I mean, if Wiggins is ultimately playing at a high ceiling, then quite honestly, there's not really any major reason to kind of look at this deal in the grand scheme of things. But definitely interesting because he was on Miami's radar at least earlier in the summer. So if things don't pan out the way that either team wants them to work with the given player, I think a swap at the deadline wouldn't necessarily be the worst idea in the world for both teams. That's going to do it for this Friday's episode of Your Heat Latest here on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video, and of course subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you have a great weekend. We got the tip-off of preseason underway against the Orlando Magic in Puerto Rico kicking off. I know I misspoke and said that it was going to be starting next week, but the first game kicking off this Saturday, October 4th, against the Orlando Magic. So very excited for that as well. Be sure to tune in the action, and we'll have more from that game coming up next week. But thanks again so much for joining us. I'm Sam Shapiro. Have a great weekend.